Have you ever felt a moment pause you so completely that the world keeps moving, but you don't? Like time notices you notice something and waits? That's what happened the first time I realized you were different. I'm not talking about attraction, that's easy, predictable. I felt that before. This was quieter, stranger. It felt like recognition without memory. Like my mind understood something my logic hadn't approved yet. You didn't walk into my life loudly. You didn't demand attention, you just existed. And somehow that changed the air around me. I never say this to anyone, I don't even think it most of the time. But you are truly different. And if I'm being honest with you, brutally honest, that scares me more than anything else. Do you know what it's like to spend your whole life building walls so efficient that even you forget what's behind them? People assume it's confidence or arrogance or obsession. They think it's ambition, but really it's control. Control over what touches you, over what matters, over what hurts. And then you showed up. You didn't try to get past the walls. That's the part that caught me off guard. You didn't knock, you didn't push, you didn't ask for anything. You just stood there looking at me like you could already see the cracks I pretended weren't there. Did you know you'd do that? Make people feel seen without interrogating them? It's unsettling, dangerous, especially to someone like me. I remember thinking, don't overthink this. I remember telling myself you were just another variable, another data point, something that would pass. I told myself that the way my thoughts kept circling back to you was coincidence. Lack of sleep, stress, habit. But habits don't feel like this. Habits don't make you pause before replying to a message because suddenly the words matter. Habits don't make silence feel louder than conversation. Habits don't make you wonder what someone is thinking when they're not even in the room. You did that, and I noticed something else, too. When I talked to you, I wasn't performing. I wasn't calculating outcomes or framing responses. I wasn't 10 steps ahead. I was just there, present. Do you have any idea how rare that is for me? I started saying less around you. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to hide behind words. I wanted you to hear what I meant, not what I engineered. That's when the fear crept in. Because the moment something matters, it gains the power to destabilize everything else. And I've built a life where stability is survival. People depend on me being unshaken, decisive, certain. My mother taught me that early, maybe without meaning to. She's always been protective, fiercely so, the kind of protection that doesn't ask how you feel, only whether you're safe, whether you're focused, whether you're making choices that won't break you later. Love to her is vigilance. So when I started thinking about you more than I should, I didn't tell her. Of course I didn't. Some things feel too fragile to expose to scrutiny, especially hers. She sees risk before possibility. She hears heartbreak before happiness. And if she looked at you through that lens, I wasn't sure what she'd see. What would your presence look like to someone who has watched me bleed quietly and rebuild myself more times than I can count? What would she say if she knew that someone you had managed to reach a place I'd kept guarded even from her? Have you ever loved someone so much you tried to protect them from knowing you loved something else? I kept you separate, not because I didn't care, because I cared too much. And still, you slipped through. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one grand moment. It was small things. The way you listened without waiting to respond, the way you didn't flinch when I spoke about things that make others uncomfortable, the way you didn't try to fix me or flatter me or define me by what the world thinks it knows. You treated me like a person, not a headline, like a man, not a myth. Do you know how disarming that is? I started imagining conversations that hadn't happened yet. Not fantasies, just possibilities. What you'd say if I told you the truth. What your face would look like if you understood how deeply this was affecting me. I imagined disappointment, too. I imagined you walking away once you saw the mess beneath the precision. That's the part I don't like to admit. I'm not afraid, of losing things. I'm afraid of losing people because people don't fail all at once. They slip away slowly, quietly, convincing you it was inevitable. And I've lived through that enough to recognize the pattern. So I did what I always do. I pulled back. You probably felt it. A pause, a shift. Maybe you wondered if you'd said something wrong. You hadn't. This was me trying to regain altitude before emotions interfered with logic. Me reminding myself that attachment creates leverage, and leverage can hurt. But distance didn't erase you, it amplified you. Every space I created just gave my thoughts more room to echo your name. Every silence felt intentional, heavy, charged with things unsaid. And the worst part, you didn't chase me, you didn't demand clarity, you didn't fill the gap with noise. You respected the space, and that made me miss you more. I started asking myself questions I don't like answering. Why does this matter? Why you? Why now? What are you destabilizing that I've been carefully maintaining for years? And the answer kept coming back the same way, softly, persistently, without justification. Because you see me. Not the version I show the world, not the one my mother worries about or defends or argues with, not the one people project onto screens. You see the quiet moments, the doubt, the fatigue, the man who sometimes wonders if all this forward motion has cost him something irreplaceable. I never told you that. I wanted to. The words sat there waiting. I never or say this to anyone, but you are truly different. I rehearsed it in my head like a confession and a warning all at once. Because once you say something like that, you can't take it back. It changes the terms, it invites consequences. And standing there on the edge of saying it, I realized something unsettling. I didn't know which outcome scared me more, that you might walk away or that you might stay. Do you feel that tension too? That quiet moment where everything could tip in one direction or another, and you're holding your breath without realizing it? I looked at you then, really looked at you, and understood this wasn't a passing moment. This was the beginning of something that would demand honesty from me, with you, with myself, with my family, especially with my mother. And I wasn't ready, not yet. But the truth was already awake, and it wasn't going back to sleep. Have you ever carried a truth so carefully that it started to feel heavier than a lie? That's where I was after that moment with you. After the realization I tried to ignore. After the words lodged themselves in my chest and refused to dissolve. I didn't say them out loud, but they started shaping everything anyway. Every pause, every glance, every choice. You probably thought I was being distant or distracted. Maybe you wondered if I was losing interest. I wasn't. I was doing the opposite. I was trying not to fall forward too fast because I knew once I did, there would be no clean way to stop. I've learned, Ed, how to manage risk. That's what people see. What they don't see is how much of that skill comes from being hurt early, from watching love turn into leverage, from understanding that vulnerability doesn't always get rewarded. Sometimes it gets exploited. And you didn't exploit anything. That's what made it worse. You stayed consistent, calm, present. You didn't change your tone or your timing. You didn't weaponize my silence. You didn't make me feel guilty for pulling back. You just remained yourself. As if you trusted that whatever I was sorting through, I'd come back when I was ready. That kind of trust is dangerous. Do you know why? Because it assumes goodness. It assumes intention. It assumes I won't disappear the way others have. And suddenly, I'm not just responsible for my own choices. I'm responsible for not betraying the faith you placed in me without asking. I started noticing how you reacted to things. Not the obvious stuff, the subtle things. The way your voice softened when you talked about family. The way your eyes changed when you thought no one was watching. The way you listened, not to respond, but to understand. It reminded me of my mother in an uncomfortable way. She used to listen like that when I was younger, before the world hardened both of us. Before concern turned into control, before love became something she expressed through warnings instead of warmth. She's always believed that if she could anticipate every possible outcome, she could spare me pie. And maybe she did, maybe she still does. That's why telling her about you felt impossible. Not because I was afraid she wouldn't like you, because I was afraid she would see exactly what you meant to me before I was ready to say it myself. She has a way of sensing when something matters, when something can change the trajectory. And when she senses that, she tightens her grip. I could already hear her voice in my head. Careful, slow down. Don't confuse intensity with connection. Don't let emotion override judgment. She would say she just wants to protect me, and she wouldn't be wrong. But protection can feel a lot like restriction when you're standing on the edge of something real. I imagine bringing you into that world, into that scrutiny, into the unspoken expectation that you would either fortify me or distract me. I wondered how you'd feel knowing that my family doesn't just meet people, they evaluate them, measure impact, calculate risk. Would you feel reduced, or would you rise above it the way you rise above everything else? I didn't know, and not knowing made me hesitate. So instead of introducing you, I compartmentalized you. I kept you in a space that felt safe because it was undefined. No labels, no declarations, no explanations required. Just moments, conversations, silences that felt charged instead of empty. But undefined doesn't mean unaffected. I started waking up thinking about things I'd said to you the night before, replaying them. Not to analyze strategy, to analyze sincerity. I wondered if you heard the restraint in my voice, if you noticed how carefully I chose words around you, as if each one carried more weight than usual, because they did. There was a night, I don't know if you remember it the same way, When everything almost spilled out, we were talking about something trivial, barely worth remembering, and then you paused just for a second, long enough to look at me like you were waiting for something. That look dismantled me. It wasn't expectation, it wasn't pressure, it was openness, like you were giving me permission to step forward without forcing me to. I almost told you then. I almost said it. That sentence, the one that had been building quietly behind my ribs. I never say this to anyone, but you are truly different. Do you know how exposed that would have made me? How irreversible. I imagined the shift it would create, the way the room would feel different after the way you might see me differently, the way I'd see myself differently, because once you admit someone matters, you can't pretend indifference ever again. And I wasn't sure I was ready to be seen that clearly, so I deflected, changed the subject, smiled when I should have confessed. You didn't push. You never do. And somehow that felt both merciful and devastating. Later alone, I thought about my mother again, about how she would react if she knew there was someone who made me hesitate like this, someone who made me consider vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a necessary risk. She'd worry you'd hurt me. She'd worry I'd lose focus. She'd worry I'd give too much of myself to something that couldn't guarantee permanence. She'd seen me give everything before. She'd seen the aftermath. And I don't blame her for wanting to spare me another fracture. But she didn't know you. She didn't know the way you ground me instead of distract me. The way you don't demand my attention. You earn it. The way you don't pull me away from myself. You pull me closer to the parts I avoid. That's the part I didn't tell her or you. Instead, I let the tension build. I let the unsaid accumulate. I let the connection deepen without acknowledgement, like a fault line slowly shifting beneath the surface. And part of me wondered how long it could last before something gave way. Because silence can only hold so much before it starts to bruise. I saw it in your eyes sometimes, a question you didn't ask, a curiosity edged with restraint. Maybe you were wondering where you stood. Maybe you were wondering if you were imagining things. You weren't. Every time you walked away, I felt it. Every time you leaned in, I felt that too. You were changing the internal math of my life, and I was pretending it was just noise, but it wasn't. It was signal. And the closer we got to acknowledging it, the louder everything else became. My fears, my history, my mother's voice, the responsibility of letting someone matter in a world where nothing stays untouched for long. I knew something had to change. Either I would finally speak or I would lose you without ever admitting why it hurt. And that realization didn't feel theoretical anymore. It felt imminent. Have you ever stood in that space where staying silent feels just as risky as telling the truth? Because that's where I was looking at, you knowing the distance between us was no longer measured in steps but in words I hadn't yet found the courage to say. Have you ever noticed how the truth doesn't arrive loudly? It doesn't kick the door down. It waits, patient, persistent, until the pressure of holding it back becomes more painful than letting it out. That's where things started to break open between us. It wasn't dramatic at first, no raised voices, no accusations, just a shift. Subtle but undeniable. The kind you feel before you can explain it. I could sense you pulling back just enough to protect yourself. Not withdrawing completely, just adjusting. Like someone who's learned that hope needs boundaries. And that terrified me because it meant you were responding to my silence. You were adapting to my hesitation. You were preparing for the possibility that I might never step forward. And suddenly the idea of losing you stopped being abstract. It became real, immediate, personal. I wanted to ask you what you were feeling. I wanted to say something that would anchor you. But words have consequences. And I'd spent my life understanding exactly how powerful they can be. Once spoken, they don't belong to you anymore. They reshape the space between people. I wasn't sure I was ready for that space to change. Then my mother noticed. She always does. She didn't ask directly. She never does. She made an observation instead. The way she always frames concern is curiosity. She said I seemed distracted, quieter, less sharp around the edges. She asked if everything was stable. Stable. That word landed harder than she intended. I told her everything was fine, that I was just tired, that work was heavy. All technically true, but incomplete. And she heard the omission immediately. I saw it in her eyes, the same look she used to give me when I was a kid, and tried to hide something that mattered. Later that evening, she pressed gently, asked if there was someone in my life, not in a romantic way, not explicitly, but in that careful maternal way that leaves room for retreat. I didn't answer right away, and that silence answered for me. She warned me without naming you. She talked about timing, about distractions, about how easily emotional entanglements can derail momentum. She reminded me of past situations, not by name, but by implication, fractures I'd worked hard to seal, vulnerabilities I'd sworn not to reopen. She said she just didn't want to see me hurt again. And that's when something in me pushed back. Not angrily, not defensively, just firmly. I told her I wasn't broken, that being affected didn't mean being weakened. That connection didn't automatically equal compromise. She listened, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. To her, love has always been something you manage carefully, like fire, useful, dangerous, never to be left unattended. I didn't tell her about you, not fully. I couldn't. Saying your name would have made you real in a way I wasn't ready to defend yet. But the conversation lingered. It followed me long after it ended, and then there was you. You noticed the shift in me immediately. You always do. You asked if I was okay. Simple question, no pressure, no agenda. And for a moment, I almost laughed at how much weight it carried because the honest answer was no. I wasn't okay. I was conflicted, divided, pulled between the instinct to protect myself and the growing realization that protecting myself might mean losing you. I was standing between the person I've learned to be and the person you seem to bring out without trying. I didn't know which one I trusted more. So instead of answering, I asked you something. I asked how you handle uncertainty, how you decide when something is worth the risk. You looked at me for a long moment before answering like you knew exactly what I was really asking. You said you listened to patterns to how something makes you feel over time, not just in moments of intensity. You said you believe clarity comes from honesty, even when honesty doesn't promise safety. That hit me harder than you probably realized because safety has always been my currency. Control, predictability, minimizing exposure. And here you were suggesting hat safety might be overrated if it costs you something meaningful. I went quiet after that, not because I disagreed, because I didn't know how to reconcile that idea with the life I'd built. Everything I've accomplished has been rooted in calculated risk, not emotional surrender. I've always known the odds before stepping forward, but with you, the math refused to settle. That night alone, I replayed our conversation. Your tone, your certainty, the calm way you spoke about vulnerability like it wasn't a flaw, like it was just another form of intelligence. I realized then that you weren't waiting for me to become someone else. You weren't trying to change me. You were simply offering me the chance to show up as I am without armor. And I didn't know if I remembered how to do that. The distance between us felt heavier after that, not because it grew, but because it was charged with understanding. We both knew something was unresolved, something essential, and pretending otherwise started to feel dishonest. I caught my mother watching me the next morning, really watching, like she was trying to read a future in my posture. She didn't say anything this time. She didn't need to. The concern was there, quiet and steady. I wondered what it would be like to introduce you to her, to let her see the way you speak, the way you hold yourself, the way you don't shrink in the presence of intensity. I wondered if she'd soften or if she'd harden further. More than anything, I wondered if I were as strong enough to stand between the two of you, to choose without resentment, without regret. Because choosing you wouldn't just be about romance, it would be about redefining how I let people close, how I allow myself to be known, how much uncertainty I'm willing to live with in exchange for something real. And choosing silence would be a choice too. I looked at you the next time we were together, really looked, and saw the patience in your eyes starting to thin. Not because you were demanding, but because you were human. And humans can only wait so long in ambiguity before they start to protect their hearts. That's when I knew whatever happened next, something had to be said. The tension couldn't hold indefinitely. Either I would finally let the words cross the space between us, or I would watch you slowly step back, believing I'd already made my choice. And that possibility hurt more than I expected. Do you know that feeling? When you realize avoidance is no longer neutral, it's a decision with consequences. Because that's where I was, standing right in front of you, feeling the weight of everything unsaid, knowing that the next moment, the next sentence could change the shape of my life in ways I couldn't fully predict. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to predict it. I just wanted to be honest. Have you ever reached a point where not choosing feels more dangerous than choosing wrong? That's where I stood with you. There was no dramatic setting, no perfect timing, just a moment heavy enough that it demanded truth. You were across from me, close enough that I could see the shift in your breathing, the quiet alertness in your eyes. You already knew something was coming. You always do. That intuition of yours, it's unnerving how accurate it is. I realized then that I couldn't protect you from uncertainty anymore. I was the uncertainty. So I spoke not eloquently, not strategically, just honestly. I told you I don't let people in easily, that my life is built on control, structure, and constant forward motion. And that you disrupted that in a way I didn't anticipate. I told you that when I said you were different. I wasn't trying to flatter you. I was trying to warn myself because different means unpredictable. Different means vulnerable. Different means I can't hide behind intellect or momentum or reputation. Different means you matter. You didn't interrupt me. You didn't rush me. You let the words land, even the rough ones, especially the rough ones. I watched your expression change. Not shock, not triumph, understanding, like something finally aligned. I told you about my mother. Not everything, but enough. I told you she worries because she loves fiercely. That she's seen me break in ways the world never noticed. That when she senses something powerful entering my life, her instinct is to shield me, even if that means pushing back against it. I admitted I was afraid of putting you in that position, afraid you'd feel judged, reduced, measured against standards you never asked for. Afraid I'd have to choose between defending you and preserving peace. And then I said the part that scared me most. I said I didn't know how to love without losing control. The silence after that was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It felt sacred, like the kind of pause where something real is being decided without words. When you finally spoke, your voice was steady, not rehearsed, not defensive. You said you never wanted to be hidden, but you never wanted to be a threat either. You said you didn't need certainty. You needed honesty, and that if I was willing to offer that, even imperfectly, you could meet me there. Do you know what that did to me? It dismantled the last excuse I had because you weren't asking for promises. You weren't asking for guarantees. You weren't asking me to become someone else. You were asking me to be present, to stop treating connection like a risk to be managed and start treating it like a reality to be lived. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. It felt like standing without armor and realizing I didn't need it in that moment. But the relief was tangled with fear because now that you knew, you could leave. Now that I'd named what you were to me, you held the power to decide whether it was enough or too much or something you didn't want to carry. That night after you left, my mother called. She said she'd been thinking about our conversation. She said she didn't mean make me feel like caring was a liability. She reminded me that she trusted my judgment even when she worried. I almost told her about you. I didn't, not yet, but I didn't deny it either. I said there was someone who made me think differently, someone who challenged my assumptions without trying to dismantle me, someone who didn't demand certainty but inspired clarity. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something unexpected. She said, "Just don't disappear into yourself again." That stayed with me because that's what I do when I'm afraid. I retreat inward. I become efficient instead of present. I turn people into abstractions so I don't have to feel the weight of possibly losing them. With you, that strategy stopped working. I started letting you see the unspectacular parts of me, the tiredness, the doubt, the moments where the future feels less like a vision and more like a question mark. And you didn't flinch, you didn't romanticize it either. You just accepted it as part of the landscape.